Welcome back. I wanted to do a Remembrance Day video this year, but I wanted to do something more natural, more human. And I'm in full uniform here. We're here at Gettysburg National Battlefield Park, and I wanted to cover Remembrance Day this year by being somewhere where many men, including my ancestor, fought for the freedom of our country. So in July of 1863, the U.S. Civil War was going on for quite a while by this point. And so in the small town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, 165,000 men met on these small fields, as you guys can see here, all the way out across the valley. Over 40 square miles of combat. And fought for 3 days with over 7,000 casualties, over 33,000 wounded, and many, many more missing. It's important to remember that most of the guys here were boys, brothers, husbands, fathers. The average age would have been probably around 20, 22, give or take, which is insane to think that my age would have been the average age for most of the combat here on these fields. Directly in front of me is a little round top and big round top. To the right is Devil's Den. We've seen some of the most gruesome fighting of the battle. Men would fight on top of big boulders. Over to that side to the left of me would be the Culp's Hill battlefield near the center of the Union line. Culp's Hill would be some of the most aggressive fighting and some of the longest and bloodiest of the battle. The middle would then become famous on the 3rd of July, when the Confederate Army decided to make an aggressive frontal assault after 2 bloody days of fighting through the town of Gettysburg and the outskirts of Gettysburg. I want to tell you guys a story, and it's going to be about the peach orchard, which is directly behind me. Now, this is kind of an idea. I found a young lieutenant to talk about. His name was First Lieutenant Scott C. Maddell. He was a native of Ireland. He was an immigrant here. He was a part of the 62nd PA Infantry. He would take part at the fight of Trossell's Woods, which is just below Peach Orchard. He would unfortunately lose his life at the battle, but he would write that the shots were straight peppered. The shots straight peppered the men of the 62nd. The 62nd would lose a ton of their men in this battle, but it would help hold the line. So the Peach Orchard, which is directly behind me, the Peach Orchard was a battle that is questionable, right? It is a questionable battle. It should never have happened, some people would say. Others say that it was doomed to happen no matter what. But the Battle of the Peach Orchard, which is something that happened on July 2nd, was when General Dan Sickles, I'm sure if you know anything about the Civil War, you probably know about Dan Sickles. He was a very famous general, sometimes controversially. So he would lose his leg at the Battle of the Peach Orchard, but the men that was under Sickles, he would move them. The main line was over here behind me. And what happened was he would push these men forward, putting a gap in the Union line. Now, in Sickles' mind, he found it to be an aggressive move, right? He was always an aggressive commander, right? That's always what he was. He always wanted to prove himself because, if I remember correctly, he was appointed the position through power, like money and resources, rather than actual military experience. And so he was always trying to prove himself. And so he would move his regiment from the safety of Little Round Top and Big Round Top below the mountains or hills, and he would move them quite a large distance. When you're here, it's hard to see on camera, but when you're here, this isn't just a few hundred feet. This is probably over 1,000 feet or more of space. And because of this, he left a huge gap in the line, right? The Union line now had a gap, was a large gap. So the South realized this, so General Lee, General Longstreet, and all the men under him began an assault through the Peach Orchard. Sickles would decide to be aggressive in this battle, and this battle would last for a few hours, but by 6:30 p.m. on July the 2nd, the Union was able to fix their hole in the line now due to Sickles, and Sickles would fall back, losing his leg in the fight, and the Southern men would be pushed back, and they would not be able to take the Peach Orchard. Now, I tell this story because it's a story that's barely ever discussed when people talk about Gettysburg, right? Everyone knows Lawrence Chamberlain and General Chamberlain. Everyone knows about Lee's massive picket charge engagement. Everyone knows about Round Top's Devil's Den. But the Peach Orchard is often an undervalued battle, especially since it is smack dab in the center. I don't think the camera will be able to do justice to how close it is. I mean, this is the Peach Orchard. We go right here. That Pennsylvania monument, the big one all the way out in the distance, that is the PA monument. That is the Union front and center line. This is where pickets charged, where 13,000 Confederates would make their advance across the fields on July the 3rd. But no one really knows about the Peach Orchard. No one really does. It's a battle that's often overlooked. I know from my experience of researching the battle that is an unprecedented battle. Now, I hope that was an interesting kind of story. Now, it is estimated that over 1 billion human beings have fought in wars throughout time. That is from the wars of Mongolia, Egyptians, all the way back to the American Revolution, to the Civil War, all the way up to World War II and World War I. I think it's important that we take the time once a year. I don't think it's huge from our busy lives to remember the billions of human beings that have fought for freedom, wealth, money, land, women, whatever the cause may have been. But I think that is what separates the periods, right? Because every human being has fought and bled for a cause. It may not be the cause that is the correct cause, but I feel that it's a just cause. We take World War II, for example. We all know the Nazis were not that great, right? We know this. But to be a young man in 1940, going off overseas and having a dream of maybe starting your business over here in America, but going off overseas, fighting for a cause that you may not understand, right? A lot of the guys who went over to Europe may have signed up to fight in Pearl Harbor, after Pearl Harbor, and so they were hoping to go to Japan and deal with the Asian front of the battle. But they didn't. They got sent to Europe, and they would spend 4 years, sometimes longer, depending on if they were stationed there after the war. But they would spend majority of their time fighting in a country they had no idea what was happening for the most part, right? The Holocaust wasn't really a known thing for quite a while. I mean, it was known, but nowhere near as known as it could have been. And so, and then we look at the Civil War, right? The Civil War on this battlefield, right? We're here today. Majority of these men may not have signed up to end slavery. Some of these men didn't sign up because they wanted to give slaves rights. Most of them may not even cared or known. The South had the same problem. A lot of those men were here for other reasons. They weren't all here for the same reason, and that is the human element to a war. And I think that's why it's important to memorize these different time periods, because we're not just memorizing the horrors, we're memorizing the beauty in it. One of the biggest things that I've learned in my life is, especially after reenacting, is history isn't perfect. History isn't it's not about the horrors or even the beauty. It's about the human part, right? That is what makes history, right? If history was just a Congress deciding whether or not humans had the right to vote or whatever, we would not remember it. We wouldn't. But on this field, here we are today, 160 plus years later, and there is humans with us right now. We are alone in the middle of a field, but there's a spirit that belongs forever and down to this spot. Right now, I'm leaning up against a Union artillery piece. Now, these Union artillery pieces are scattered throughout the field, same with the Confederacy. We often forget the simplest things in life. I just walked about 2.5 mile march through the town of Gettysburg with my fellow reenactors, and it was moving to see the connections being made to a time in history that is oftentimes forgotten. You see, Gettysburg is not special. I mean, it's special to some people, but it is endowmentally not that special in terms of battlefields. There's thousands of U.S. and Confederate battlefields spread out throughout the United States and the eastern and southern coast, down from Florida to Texas, all the way up to New York, right? And so, we're not as far as New York, but still. But we only remember the handful of big battles. We don't remember the small ones, where maybe only 5 or 6 guys died in a skirmish. Battlefields like this are always special because they're not just small battles, right? This is a huge battle. This is 40 square miles of pain and suffering that these men and women went through. And it's not even just the men, right? We often forget about that as well. There was a lot of women here in Gettysburg. The only civilian to die was a female, which is astounding, right? We had an entire town, around 5,500 people during the time, and only one single civilian died, and unfortunately it was a female. And if I remember the story correctly, she was offering help and aid to another soldier. I don't remember if it was a Confederate or Union, might have been both, and was caught by, I believe, a stray bullet that ended up killing her. One little round top, we obviously know about General Lawrence Chamberlain, who, with the 20th Maine, he would hold off against countless waves of Confederacy. And we know in the front, in the middle, right, we have the angle that saw hundreds of Confederates getting mowed down in point-blank range, getting stabbed, bayoneted, and just mutilated by the Union. We also know of the Battle of the Railroad Cut, where the Iron Brigade made their final stand and was able to secure that location and came out victorious. We know about Culp's Hill and the men and women who lost their lives pushing up that hill. This is Remembrance Day. It's not just a day to say thank you, it's a day to remember. That is what makes us Americans, right? Across the globe, there has been countless wars that have been gone forgotten throughout time. We know of so many wars throughout history, but I always wonder how many wars we just don't know about, right? How many wars have gone forgotten? And so this Remembrance Day, I'm making this video because take a minute out of your busy day. I know my camera work is shoddy, but seriously, take a minute and look at this field. Imagine being a young man marching all the way from Virginia after maybe not winning so many firefights. The Union was on a pretty bad losing streak until Gettysburg. Gettysburg was that turning point for them. But imagine coming up here and the excitement they would have had. I've heard stories. One of my unit commanders told a story about how at least the 28th was feeling quite good when they came back to PA. But then you get here after marching for 2 days, 50 to 100 miles, and the absolute carnage that would take place in these fields. There's a story that I heard a long time ago about how the river in Gettysburg went red with the blood. I think it's hard for us to understand the amount of carnage that was here. So 7,000 men died, 33,000 were wounded. 33,000. That is a concert hall, a ballpark. Imagine an entire football field of wounded, scattered for over 40 miles. And they weren't just scattered in here, just one here, one there. There were piles of them throughout these fields. The miles that were Pickett's charge would have seen a field just covered in the dead of gray. The men of the Confederacy also had suffered a huge loss at Gettysburg. And I know on their march home, there was sadness in the air. Lee himself was apologizing to his men for causing them the harm that they had so undoubtedly had to happen to them. But this is just one battlefield. In a war that took over 600,000 lives, nearly 1 million, for the rights of another man. And there's something special in that. There's a beauty in that. I like to think of war as a necessary evil sometimes. I know some people don't like that term, but it's the truth. This country was formed from war in the Revolution. We only had that option, right? The Continental Congress had no other options. They tried the political happiness that it was. And so war was the only necessary option. We won that war, won our independence, and less than 100 years later, we bled on our own fields that we fought so valiantly for. And I think that's an interesting thing to deal with as a person, especially someone who is like me, who is very proud of my heritage, proud of my country, and proud of the men and women who've put their lives on the line, not just in the past, but in the present. We have hundreds of thousands of U.S. Marines, Army, Navy, Air Force, all around the globe at the current moment, far from their families, far from their loved ones, suffering the great suffer for us. So take the time, think about the Remembrance Day, and just know that our ancestors fought not for themselves, but they fought for the generations to come. Lincoln said in his speech, the Gettysburg Address, here addressed this field, he said, "We must not forget, for them deaths are not in vain." And I think that's important. So their deaths are not in vain. If you haven't been to a Civil War battlefield or even a Revolutionary battlefield here in the United States, it is something special. There is a warmness that comes over you when you're here, and you get to see these fields in person, and you understand the history around them. It does something to the soul. That's what I would like to say. When I marched today, and I came over the crest, so we look directly over there. I came directly at that red house, that brick house you see right here. I came up the road, called the Emmitsburg Road. Came up a little bit behind it, towards the General Meade statue. And when I came over with the men, there was a most insane view of the battlefields. And just as we were finishing our part of our ceremonies, the flags all blew in the same direction at the same exact moment as the taps were being played. And I like to think that it was their spirit blowing those flags. This Remembrance Day is special to me. This is the first Remembrance Day that I truly understand my ancestor. His name is John A. Ebright. He was a part of the 4th U.S. Cavalry. He fought here in Gettysburg. And I like to wonder the things that he had experienced here. It's quiet. There's cars all around us, but it is still so quiet. And it makes you wonder what they would have went through those days. Imagine being the Confederacy the first day, the first night. I mean, they blew through the town. Victory, 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 they thought, as they came through the town. The Union was on the run. Then the fish hook came. The Union made a fish hook from over there, all the way around, down to here, and it hooked up around the top. And then it was defeat after defeat after defeat. How does one wake up from a morning of defeats, from a day of defeats, and continue that fight forward? We'll never know. Hopefully. This year is more important than ever to make this video. With the presidential election results that we got here in November, some are happy, some are sad. That's fine. But our country is divided. Lincoln said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." So think about these guys for once. The next time you're angry at the politicians who decide your fates, think about these guys, what they went through. Would it be worth it to do it again? That is the question you have to ask yourself. Civil war isn't always the answer, but in 1800s, it was. 600,000 Americans paid the price for that. There's something special here. And throughout many of the fields throughout the United States, Chancellorsville, Chattanooga, Fort Sumter, Vicksburg, Richmond, the Forest, the wheat fields here, the peach orchard. So take the time, remember. You might find yourself surprised at the outcome you may get. You don't have to be a full-blown blooded, a patriotic American to appreciate the lives that were lost. You just have to take the time to understand things that make us one. I'm standing right here at the Clark's Battery, Battery B, the 1st New Jersey, Light Artillery 3rd Corps. Fought here from 2 until 7 o'clock on July 2nd, 1863, firing 1,300 rounds of ammunition, around 1,300 cannonballs, cluster shot, etc. They lost 1 man, 16 wounded, missing 3. There's history everywhere. Not just here, not just in Europe, but in your hometown. I strive to inform everyone to go look at your cemeteries. I just got done doing a cemetery in outside of Lancaster over the week, and we honored a Medal of Honor recipient who fought here in the Civil War. There are those type of people in every cemetery around this country. America has lost nearly 1.2 million veterans. And that number is skyrocketing, higher than ever before. The average day, 22 veterans take their own lives due to the hardships of their experiences. So don't forget that. You see a veteran, thank them. It doesn't matter if you agree with the politics, I don't care. Because for all you know, your ancestors died on a field somewhere in West Virginia or Alabama or Georgia or North Carolina, alone, in pain, and feeling helpless. But they did it for you and for the future of this nation. So take the time and respect that. You'd be pleasantly surprised of how your life will change in front of you at the very moment. Now, I'll try to end this video off on a positive note. Especially so this camera worked, this awful camera. I should have had someone record this. Future reference, have someone else record. It is our job, the living, to remember. The dead can't remember. Okay? There might be ghosts out here. Maybe. There might be spirits out here, maybe. But the remember part comes with those that are still living. Me, you, can decide to remember or let it be forgotten. And I strive to tell you to not let it be forgotten, because that, my friends, that is the worst thing that this country and this world needs at the current moment, is to let history go. So thank you guys for watching. I'm going to give one more panoramic look at the battlefields. And just think about the choices that you make daily. And decide whether or not your ancestor would be proud.